In Pedagogy of Freedom by Paulo Freire, he stated the purpose for being progressive educators to teach students to be autonomous. Social foundations and cultural diversity have started me on the journey to analyze my personal experiences and reflect on my biases and realize my privilege that I do not get in the way of my being a progressive educator. Majority of my life, the issue of racial diversity did not exist for me. People were people. I did assume incorrectly that everyone was as privileged financially as I was. For example, I assumed that every family had 2 cars, a home, and were able to buy things that they wanted. I maintained this belief through my teen years when I moved to Evergreen, Colorado, where everyone was white and privileged. It wasn't something I was concerned about. I now see that I lived as a somewhat shallow existence. Paulo Freire's definition of universal human ethics makes the point that it is important to condemn an elitist purity that stems from racial, sexual, and class discrimination. To explain, in some schools there is extreme prejudice towards minority students in honors classes, and a few parents respond that they don't want their children in class with those kids. This is what I mean by condemning this elitist purity. In the article Funds of Knowledge for Teaching Using Qualitative Approach to Connect Homes and Classrooms by Mole, Amante, and Neff, and Gonzalez, a study was done by an anthropologist and a teacher who went to their students' home to try and understand a students' funds of knowledge. I did not even think about the possibility of home visits to learn more about my students and their families. This seemed to be quite important to understanding their values and background. Milton Bennett's article, Overcoming the Golden Rule, provided me with a different perspective than I had ever thought about. The Golden Rule is taught to elementary students as a simple, easy-to-remember code of conduct. Treat others how you want to be treated. What Bennett's article made me realize is that the single reality theory and idea of America as a melting pot is a narrow way to think, and that cultural pluralism and a multiple reality theory is a more contemporary way of thinking. Not just sympathizing with people, but really empathizing with what they really need. It is apparent to me now that my biases may have been evident to others. While I attended Colorado State University, I tried to befriend the minority students I lived with in the dorm, but they were not interested in becoming friends. I conclude that they did not want to be my friend because I did not talk or dress like them. As a member from the dominant group, I unconsciously recognized this, where I unconsciously acted as if I was superior to them. In Harvard's implicit biases test, I had an automatic preference towards European American. Jean Moule said in her article, Understanding Unconscious Bias and Unintentional Racism, I know that as an African American, when I enter a room of white people, I pick up subtle clues, either consciously or unconsciously, as to who is a good open contact for me versus someone who may have difficulty engaging with me easily based on my race. Hale Johnson's book Privilege, Power, and Difference in Chapter 2, Privilege, Oppression, and Difference, his introduction of the diversity wheel. I am a German-American, female, 24 years old, able-bodied, heterosexual, have a bachelor's in business administration, entry-level experience in hospitality, single, Christian, and Coloradan. In addition to difference, 2 points he made was, these characteristics do not explain individual personality, and if any of these characteristics were to change, then a person's life would be dramatically altered. This second point hit home with me, where I thought, what if I was in an accident and was paralyzed for the rest of my life? Would I still be known as Skier Alyssa, or would I be Wheelchair Alyssa, which would change how others perceive me, what I enjoy, and what I am capable of? The dominant group is those who have the most abilities and rights. This would include white, male, able-bodied, wealthy, and U.S. citizen. A part of privilege is the social construction of reality. Dr. Johnson on page 19 said, the dominant group, like all dominant groups, has the power to define what is considered to be normal. This theory of normal that has socially constructed reality ignores the simple fact that in the normal course of life, people come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes and physical and mental conditions. Living in America, I realized my privilege to have a U.S. citizenship, and unless one is born in the U.S., it's very hard to obtain. In America, having a U.S. citizenship is considered a privilege that gives its citizens the right and responsibility to pay taxes and therefore the right to vote. To change the role of privilege and move beyond differences and stop thinking in terms of privilege and oppression, Alan Johnson said in Chapter 9, page 127, the greatest barrier to change is that dominant groups, as we've discussed, don't see the trouble as their trouble, which means they don't feel obliged to do something about it. This means for a variety of reasons, because they don't know that trouble exists in the first place, because they don't have to see it as their trouble, because they see it as a personal rather than a systematic problem, because they're reluctant to give up privilege, because they feel angry and deprived and closed to the idea that they have privilege, because they're blinded by prejudice, because they're afraid of what will happen if they acknowledge the reality of privilege and oppression. People who have privilege are afraid that privilege will be reversed on them. During my journey of learning my biases, this is what I truly was afraid of: reverse discrimination. I'm still afraid of this, but in my research on privilege, I realize that it's not a personal problem, but deeply ingrained as prejudices and stereotypes into the system that makes up the privilege and power structure of the U.S. Privilege is available to all with progressive education by understanding funds of knowledge, being attentive to other perspectives with the multiple reality theory, understanding one's unconscious biases, realizing where one exists on the privilege spectrum, and how that fits into the social construction of privilege and oppression. One of the definitions of teaching that caught my attention from J. Irvine's book, Educating Teachers by Diversity, Seen with a Cultural Eye, in Chapter 1 is caring. This definition of caring includes 3 characteristics: care, concern, and connection, and includes for a teacher to set limits, provide structure, set and maintain high expectations, and push for achievement. To be a caring teacher, if my students recognize that I care about their success, they will be encouraged to care about their success.
Drunk on the wine of love for thee. Well, tell me, when will I be blessed to join your blissful company? So many stories and so many fables of how the king sings, of how the wild whales in Jerusalem.